Hey everyone, and welcome to Stochastic Agency. It's August 10th for RPG A Day 2025, and today's prompt is Origin, but we're going to talk about something I don't really mention very often, and it's probably akin to that tell me about your favorite character story, and that's my origin story. So I am Gen Xer. Don't let that kind of set the tone for the rest of the video. But I did come from the final remnants of like what could be called the latchkey kids. And one weekend, my parents decided they wanted to go out to dinner without any of the kids. And this is after my oldest sister had already moved out of the house. So of course, that's left up to the older brother, the middle brother, right? And unfortunately, unbeknownst to my parents, my brother already had plans. And those plans were to go out on a date with his girlfriend. But my brother, always being the agile, business-minded person that he is, decided that he would just say yes. And he quickly formulated a plan by getting a hold of his girlfriend and her parents, and devised a way to pass on the younger brother to her younger brother as a babysitting opportunity. It's only going to be for one night, and I don't have any idea what the whole conversation sounded like or what it looked like. All I knew was that I was getting in my brother's little Honda Rabbit and going over to her apartment to meet the babysitter. At least that's what I was told in the car from what I remember, because this was an awful long time ago. To put the time frame in perspective, when I got there, I was handed off to her younger brother, and there was a conversation about what they were going to do with me. And so she suggested that we just play D&D. Now this was the time of the blue and white box, if I remember correctly, should be the Holmes edition. And we played. Since that's so long ago, and this is where I diverge from most people who talk about their first experience, is that I don't remember a lot about what actually happened. I mean, this was a very long time ago. This is maybe before or my first year of middle school. So I was really young. And I do remember having fun. I remember playing lots of characters. I remember going through a dungeon. I remember fighting monsters and casting spells and picking locks and finding traps and doing all the things you do in the D&D of that age. But that was the very first experience. Move forward a little bit, and we come to what was originally my starting setup, right? The World of Greyhawk and what could be called the magenta box, right? This is 1980, and that took place probably the late years of middle school before I went into high school. And I played with friends that I went to middle school with here in Kansas City. And the experience was chaotic. As many people say, we read the books, we tried to understand how to play the game for kids of that age. And in the end, we just kind of made characters, made dungeons, we played modules, and there were a lot of people taking turns. I ran games and other people ran games. And there was, at any given time, anywhere between and about 5 or 6 of us that would play. They lived in the neighborhood, kind of behind my house, where I would have to go and walk through the woods and then cut through somebody's yard, and then go a couple blocks, and I would arrive at my friend's house. And they kind of all lived together over there. Move forward a little bit more, and we get to advanced D&D, where I was in high school and played more often with a lot more friends, at a place not too far from where I used to live. And that was a much more intense once a week, every weekend, we were playing, entire Saturdays or entire Sundays or sometimes the entire weekend being taken up by it. And that was from the way up into, we started seeing some second edition coming out, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. But then college. And college was moving away, going down south to Springfield, Missouri. Some of my friends were there. We played a lot of different games. Not that we didn't play a lot of different games when I still lived in Kansas City. Games from that era also were Rifts and Call of Cthulhu, Villains and Vigilantes. We played some Champions. We played some really early Vampire the Masquerade. We were still playing Gamma World, Warhammer Fantasy First Edition, and, Paranoia. We even played Toon. Lots of different games were available back then, and it was very much the early days of gaming culture. Yes, I did go through the Satanic Panic and all that entails. Never had my parents throw my books away or anything like that. But by the time I got to college, it was trying to figure out, how you're going to make a living. And there were lots of nights where we did play Underground, and we did play Torg, which we did also play back in high school. Very fun game from first edition. But as I became more and more involved in schoolwork, unlike most people, I did have a break. And that break would last for a very long time. Now, during that time, that does not mean that I stayed outside of the gaming culture. Every now and then you would come across people who you work with who were playing. And in the culinary field, it's kind of difficult to be available on nights and weekends, and even most holidays. So the gaming experience kind of dried up, but that didn't dissuade me from being interested about gaming culture, and most importantly, the idea of play. So as I moved through several years of working in restaurants and private dining institutions and country clubs, it became less and less about what you see here and on the wall behind me, and more about, and gonna love this, more about stuff like this, These were kind of the way that I could look at games from a different perspective. Something outside the general gaming conversations that you would have with people who were playing games, because you didn't really have the time. And on top of that, I wanted to learn more about play and play culture in general, what it means to play. Why is play so attractive? Why is play so downplayed amongst adults? Was kind of one of the things I came across, kind of a sideline that was spurred by my interest in preferred tastes when I was doing culinary studies at Forest Park Community College in St. Louis. And it changes the way you look at games. And my view on games and gaming has changed quite a bit over the years. I was involved for quite a while in Warhammer, and as they love to say, it's very hard to break the plastic crack. Painting miniatures, building models, building lists, going over to friends' houses with, tons of miniatures and playing skirmish games or full-on army games. Eventually it did wind up kind of going bust, because that's much like role-playing books. It can get quite expensive if you want to stick with that hobby, because it's not just about miniatures, it's about paints and tools and all this other stuff that goes into it. If you want to see anything on that, you can just look up miniature painting and wargaming on YouTube. And somewhere in the mid-2000s, during the final days of G+, I had come across a community of people who were really excited about games. And it was kind of the burgeoning field of more direct interaction between people, because video was coming online. Of course, there were forums, and this is long before, places like Substack or Reddit or anything like that. But there were certainly forums, like I remember Dragon's Foot back in the days. And this is also the time at which Adept Play and The Forge were all kind of developing in the indie scene, which was something I was kind of unaware of at the time. And in fact, I wouldn't learn more about that until I started participating in the early days of Facebook, and the RPG Brigade was really starting to grow. And it was an interesting place to be able to post videos and have conversations that didn't get lost, especially in these days, which I understand everybody loves a good Discord, but I mean, for me, I may be Gen X, but I like to have coherent conversations. So that really bloomed, and that's where I met people like Anthony Boyd and Andrew Wood and the Get Gentleman Gamer, the Complex Game Apologist, and many, many other people at the time. And there was a lot of discussion around a lot of games in the very early parts of the RPG Brigade. Like many communities, it did start to consolidate towards D&D and D&D-like games, everything involved in the D20 system, and started to have some schisms. And I understand that RPG a day is supposed to be a positivity, and there were a lot of positive interactions and experiences that came out of the RPG Brigade. Don't regret my time there at all, but eventually kind of wound up moving on from there. Still involved in the culinary field at that point, but I was soon to be on my way out when I moved back to Kansas City from St. Louis. And that's where I started looking up old gamer buddies to see who was and who wasn't still in Kansas City, and if they were or were not still gaming. And I found a few over the years that I've been back, and it's interesting to go in and have conversations with those initial conversations with a couple of them. I did just recently find another one who was a little bit harder to track down because, you know, most people from my generation are not really involved in social media as much as most people are these days. And so they were a little harder to track down. But those initial conversations about coming back and seeing the ones who were still gaming, the ones who didn't game, talking to the ones who moved away, developed families, you know, the general things that happen in life. It was just interesting to see and have discussions with them, not necessarily around role-playing games, but more about play and what play had become to mean for those that had moved away. I remember a very good friend of mine named Archie, who I knew from high school architectural drafting class, and he was a big part of my advanced D&D and somewhat second edition experience of playing role-playing games. Him, along with a few others in that the senior and junior years of high school, where gaming became pretty intense for a couple of years, from like say 87, or no, 88, 80, oh, and 89, no, 88, 89, 90 when I graduated, and then 91 kind of moved out of Kansas City. But, you know, he had kids, and talking to him about playing with his kids and what they did for fun, you know, has always been something that's been fascinating to me. And so that's more or less how I got started in my experience of coming into and continuing to look at and participate in the role-playing game hobby. There's so many facets around it that I find interesting, much like the reason why I became so intrigued with the culinary field. Everybody has a certain taste and a certain bias and a certain preference, a certain culture they like to participate in. They have a particular style that they like. It can be very niche. It can be very broad in many respects. And the diversity of points of views, whether they're extreme in one direction or another, are just interesting to me for how people want to participate in the role-playing hobby. So while it's not like most, I mean, that's it. You know, off and on, which I don't have any regrets about. I mean, sure, it would have been great to have a continuously growing experience. But I think there's something to be said about taking a break, whether that's voluntary or forced. I mean, come on. As we get older, or as anybody gets older, and they have something they like to do as a hobby, it's hard sometimes to find an opportunity to participate with it in it, to find people who want to participate in it and who you have similar interests with. So in that diversity of perspectives, biases, and preferences, there's always going to be a group of people out there that you can find or put together, or they may find you. Maybe it's your old friends. Maybe you're the one that stayed in the city where you grew up, or maybe you're the one who moved away and came back and somehow they found out that you were back in town. If you really want to go back and find out what that could be like, you could always look up, I think it was called Gold, The Night of the Lich King. It's about a 14-year-old YouTube series. Sound might be a little bit bad on it by now, but it's kind of aged decently, I think. So what was your origin story? How did you get started? How did you evolve as a player? How did you grow as a player? How did you find the people? How did you disconnect from the people that you used to game with as you were growing up? And did you go back and try and find them? Do they still play? The important thing about RPG a Day is to have fun, to enjoy the people that we spend our time with as a pastime, whether you're Gen X, a millennial, or maybe even a boomer who is a grognard. It is really about play and being able to enjoy it with a certain amount of unbridled abandonment. So get out there and have fun. Play a different game. Play with some different people. And just try and be good to each other.